Before it had a name, it was only property. Dragged through the dust of last chance, it had no past and, it seemed, no future. All that could be heard was the scrape of coarse canvas on the dirt, and beneath it, a breath so shallow it was nearly a ghost. His supplies loaded, Jedediah Stone was ready to leave, to return to the silence of his mesas. That's when he saw it. A silent shape, cloaked and hidden. The kind of secret a whole town agrees not to see. And in that moment, he knew his journey home would have to wait. The sun over the town of Last Chance showed no mercy. It was the kind of late August afternoon where sound itself seemed to surrender, leaving only a heavy silence that pressed down on the dusty main street. Heat shimmered up from the baked earth, warping the view of the weathered storefronts and the tired-looking horses hitched to the posts. And standing near the watering trough, a little separate from the handful of souls brave enough to face the glare, was Jedediah Stone. His battered felt hat, its brim a permanent shadow over his eyes, did little to hide a face carved by sun and solitude. His ranch, the Silent Mesa, lay a half-week's ride north, where the world opened up and a man could forget the sound of his own voice. That silence had settled deep within him, into the lines around his mouth and the quiet stillness of his gaze. He wasn't in town for conversation. He was there for a salt block for his cattle, a new bit for his bridle, and the kind of peace that came only from putting miles between himself and other people. His expectations for the day were as spare and practical as the man himself. He was simply waiting for the auction to begin, get what he needed, and disappear back into the vast, empty landscape that he called home. The auction began without fanfare. Bartholomew Finch, a man as thin and dry as a locust husk, started his rhythmic patter. A set of rusted branding irons that nobody claimed. A saddle with a split seam. A team of weary-looking oxen that drew a few half-hearted bids from farmers calculating the cost of feed against the coming winter. Jedediah was about to turn away, his business concluded in his mind, when the air changed. The lazy afternoon buzz died on a single, sharp note of anticipation. Two grim-faced men led a figure from the shadows of the stable. It was small, and draped head to toe in a heavy, stained canvas tarp, the kind used to cover cargo on a long, hard haul. It moved with a hesitation that spoke of a spirit on the verge of breaking. Barty Finch let the silence hang for a moment, his sharp eye scanning the crowd. And now, gentlemen, his voice dropped, becoming a conspiratorial whisper that carried unnervingly in the still air. A special consignment. An indentured servant. Passage debt to be squared away. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Healthy. And without prospects. A blank slate, you might say. A low murmur went through the small assembly, the sound of men shuffling their feet on the hard-packed dirt. Eyes were averted, finding sudden interest in a worn-out boot or a splinter on the hitching post. This was an old, ugly business, a ghost from harder times that most preferred to forget. Jedediah felt a cold knot form in his gut. He watched the shrouded figure stand motionless, its head bowed beneath the canvas. There was a profound loneliness in that stillness, a desperate surrender that resonated with something deep inside his own barricaded soul. He saw the flicker of distaste in the eyes of others, the quick, dismissive glances. And in that moment, the quiet peace he had come to town seeking was utterly shattered. A voice in Jedediah's head, the one that always preached caution and distance, screamed at him to turn around. To get on his horse and ride. But he didn't move. He felt the coarse dust of the street under his boots, the relentless sun on the back of his neck, and an instinct older than reason took hold. Without a conscious thought, his hand went up. $20. The words were gravelly, torn from a throat more accustomed to silence. They cut through the murmuring with a shocking clarity. Barty Finch's eyes widened for a second before a professional gleam took over. The bidding that followed was sparse, hesitant. A rancher in the back offered 22. A freight hauler grunted 25. They were calculating worth in terms of hard labor and long hours. But Jedediah wasn't buying labor. For reasons that swam just beyond his understanding, he just kept raising the bid, his gaze locked on the still, canvas-draped form. $50, Jedediah said, his voice now steady, final. A hush fell over the remaining onlookers. It was a fool's price. Barty Finch scanned the crowd one last time, a thin smile playing on his lips. Sold, he chirped, the crack of his small gavel sounding like a gunshot in the silence. To Mr. Stone. The crowd dissolved like smoke. Men mounted their horses or disappeared into the saloon, eager to put distance between themselves and the strange, uncomfortable event. In less than a minute, Jedediah was alone on the sun-baked street with his purchase. The silence that returned was different now. It was heavier, filled with the weight of his impulsive act. He, a man who had built a fortress of solitude, had just invited a stranger into its very heart. He looked at the motionless figure, a ghost cloaked in canvas. "All right then," he muttered, the sound of his own voice foreign in his ears. He didn't know what he had done, or why. He only knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he could not have left them there. The journey north to the Silent Mesa was a long one, marked only by the sun's slow arc across the sky. Jedediah rode ahead, the steady plod of his horse a familiar rhythm. But behind him was a new sound, the rhythmic creak and groan of the wagon wheels carrying his silent passenger. Each mile stretched the silence between them, and the vast, empty plain seemed to mock him. What had he done? He, a man whose only rule was to be left alone, had brought the unknown into the very heart of his world. His ranch house was not a home, but a fortress against the wilderness. Small, sturdy, built of stone and thick timber. It was his sanctuary. He led the figure to a small room off the main living space. It was sparse, but clean. A simple cot, a washstand with a ceramic basin, a single straight-backed chair. "There's water in the pitcher," he said, his voice sounding harsh in the quiet room. "Clean clothes on the chair. Kitchen's through there. When you're ready." He avoided looking at the canvas shape, an inexplicable awkwardness making him turn for the door. He needed the porch. He needed the familiar horizon to make sense of the new, unsettling geography of his own life. His hand was on the wooden doorframe when a sound stopped him. It was quiet, almost lost in the sigh of the wind through the eaves. A voice. Soft, but clear as a desert spring. "Jedediah." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. His name, spoken by the nameless, silent figure. A jolt, sharp as a lightning strike, shot through him. His heart, a slow and steady drum against his ribs, suddenly hammered. He turned, slowly, a storm of disbelief and a strange, unfamiliar hope warring within him. "How?" he finally managed to ask, the word rough, a stranger in his own throat. A hand, slender and pale with dirt caked under the nails, emerged from beneath the canvas. It paused for a heartbeat, trembling slightly, then moved with a slow, deliberate purpose. The heavy tarp was pulled back, then fell away to the floor with a soft, final thud. He had braced himself for the worst, a face broken by hardship, a gaze defeated. But the face that met his was not what he expected. It was young, framed by waves of dark hair clinging with dust. Her features were strong, her chin set with a quiet determination despite the streaks of grime and dried tears on her cheeks. And her eyes. Her eyes were a deep, steady brown, and in them was not fear, but a weariness so profound it looked ancient. "I heard the auctioneer," she said, her voice still soft, but gaining a thread of strength. "When he shouted your name. After the final bid." She held his gaze, and her next words struck him more forcefully than her first. "Everyone else. They looked right through me. Or looked away in disgust." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "You looked at me. Even with the canvas on. I could feel it. A truth, undeniable and vast, passed between them in that shared glance. The cold knot of confusion in his gut didn't disappear, but it changed. It was no longer pity he felt, nor the pride of a rescuer. It was a deep, unsettling sense of recognition. He had purchased a life, yes, but in the quiet dignity of her gaze, he understood he had stumbled upon a soul as resilient as the stone of his own silent mesas. And the walls he had built around his life, brick by solitary brick, suddenly seemed fragile and terrifyingly small. Her name was Anna. The story of how she came to be on that auction block did not come in a flood, but in quiet drops, like the first rains after a long dry season. It was a familiar, brutal tale of the trail. A family of hopeful farmers from Ohio, a wagon heavy with dreams. Then the fever came, swift and merciless, taking her parents within a week of each other on the banks of the Platte River. She was left with nothing but the crushing debt for their passage, a debt that led her to Last Chance. Jedediah listened. He offered no words of comfort, for he had none to give. But in the quiet telling of her loss, he felt the ghosts of his own long-buried grief stir. It was a language of sorrow that needed no translation. Anna did not speak of her sorrows again. She did not ask for pity. Instead, she began to work. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her hands, once soft, soon learning the language of rough wood, coarse rope, and hot iron from the stove. The cabin, once just a shelter from the wind, slowly began to breathe. There was the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the sight of a mended shirt laid neatly on a chair. Their talk remained sparse, tethered to the practical needs of the ranch. The state of the fences. The signs of an early winter. The dwindling supply of flour. But gradually, something shifted. One evening, he pointed towards the high cliffs, to the silhouette of a lone eagle returning to its nest. The next morning, she gestured to the east, to a sliver of dawn light that painted the canyon walls in hues of rose and gold. They were two solitary people, speaking in the simple language of the world around them. The initial, sharp awkwardness of her presence was fading, replaced by a quiet, steady rhythm. It was no longer the rancher and his purchase. It was becoming a fragile, unspoken partnership, forged in the vast, abiding silence of the mesas. The seasons turned on the Silent Mesa. The harsh sun of summer gave way to the sharp, clear light of autumn. Anna's presence was no longer a disruption, it was a quiet undercurrent to the rhythm of the land. By the kitchen door, in a small patch of earth she had tilled herself, a few stubborn herbs took root. A sprig of thyme, some wild sage. It was a small, tenacious patch of green against the vastness of the brown and gray stone, a quiet testament to a life that refused to be barren. Trouble came, as it always did in that country, without warning. A sudden autumn downpour turned the dry wash below the house into a raging, muddy torrent, threatening to tear the small corral from its foundations. In the driving rain, they worked as one. There were no shouted commands, only instinct and a shared purpose. He wrestled with a breaking fence post while she, nimble and fearless, coaxed the terrified horses towards higher ground. Hours later, soaked and shivering in the quiet aftermath, they stood inside the cabin. He handed her a coarse wool blanket, and for a moment, his calloused fingers brushed against hers. It was a simple touch, but in the shared exhaustion and the low light of the lantern, a silent understanding passed between them. It was the gratitude of survivors, a profound acknowledgement of the other's strength. The next time Jedediah rode into Last Chance, Anna sat on the wagon seat beside him. The whispers and curious glances were still there, but they were different now. The townsfolk didn't see a master and his indentured. They saw two people who moved with a quiet, unspoken syncopation. They saw the calm, steady way she met their stares, and the almost imperceptible easing of the rigid line of Jedediah's shoulders. Their bond, forged in the silent canyons and tempered by the flash flood, was no longer a private truth. It was a quiet, undeniable fact, as real and enduring as the stone mesas that guarded their world. Two solitary lives were slowly, irrevocably, becoming one. The first true cold of winter had arrived, bringing with it a night sky so clear and deep it looked like polished obsidian. The stars over the Silent Mesa were sharp and brilliant, a silent, watching host. Jedediah found Anna on the small porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, mending a tear in his saddlebag by the pale yellow light of a lantern. The comfortable silence that now existed between them was a living thing, built of shared work and unspoken understanding. He sat on the porch steps, the cold of the wood seeping through his trousers. "Anna," he began, his voice low, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. The arrangement. When I brought you here. He stopped, the word bought a stone he couldn't bring himself to lift. It was wrong. She paused her work, her needle still in the canvas. She looked at him, her steady gaze softened by the lantern light. The arrangement was for a debt, Jedediah, she said softly. It was a number in a ledger. You gave me a place to stand when the ground had washed out from under me. Her eyes drifted towards the vast, starlit darkness. You gave me back my name. He looked at her then, truly looked. He saw the quiet strength in her face, the resilience in the set of her shoulders, the profound spirit that had taken root in this harsh, lonely land and made it bloom. The fortress he had built around his heart felt less like a defense and more like a prison he was finally ready to leave. He took a slow breath, the cold air burning his lungs. The words came, not easily, but with the force of an undeniable truth. This place, he said, gesturing with his chin to the dark mesas and the star-dusted sky. It's not silent anymore. Not since you came. He met her gaze, his own eyes conveying everything his words could not. I'm asking you to stay, Anna. Not because of any debt. Not by any terms at all. He paused, letting the final, most important words stand alone. But as my wife. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face, a beautiful, genuine light that seemed to banish the last shadows from the landscape. A single tear escaped and traced a clean path through the lingering dust on her cheek. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Yes, she whispered, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable joy. Yes, Jedediah. And under the boundless, silent canvas of the western sky, two solitary souls, brought together by a cruel twist of fate, found their true home. Not in a place, but in each other. The lonely rancher and the woman who saw him had finally found their horizon, together, ready to face whatever dawn the unforgiving West had in store.